To reveal the writer's identity, says it's taking this extremely rare step of running an anonymous op-ed to protect the job of this official. They believe it is in the public interest to deliver this insider's perspective of what they claim is really happening inside the administration. In a tweet, the Times appeared to have accidentally narrowed the number of suspects by revealing the official is a male. That's what they said anyway. This official insists he and others want the administration to succeed, are encouraged by policies that have made America safer and have made the economy better, and are now working from within, they say, to stop erratic decisions. The official writing, quote, "This is not the work of the so-called deep state. It's the work of the steady state. Some of the president's aides have been cast as villains by the media, but in private, they have gone to great lengths to keep bad decisions contained to the West Wing, though they're clearly not always successful. It may be cold comfort in this chaotic era, but Americans should know there are adults in the room." Now, interesting timing, as you noted. It comes just a day after details started spilling out of Bob Woodward's new book, where he asserts top officials like James Mattis have privately expressed frustration about the commander-in-chief's intellect and have been appalled by presidential suggestions, such as ordering the Pentagon to assassinate the Syrian president. That book claims Mattis has stayed on to help prevent the start of a World War III, but the secretary put out a blistering statement declaring the idea he expressed contempt for the commander-in-chief is a product of someone's quote-unquote rich imagination. The president today thanked Mattis for that and lashed out at the New York Times.
Can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020 because of what we've done.
Now, there's a particularly remarkable part of this op-ed where the anonymous author actually quotes an anonymous source inside the White House about an anonymous policy decision the president allegedly flip-flopped on at the last minute. They don't give you the details of it. So it's anonymous within anonymous. So by calling this official, by the way, a Trump administration official, a senior official, it broadens out beyond the White House. It literally could be dozens and dozens, maybe hundreds of different officials within the government, because as you know, Shannon, there's dozens of government agencies. So a senior official in the administration outside of the White House, a lot of people.
That's a pretty broad net, and all of us tonight are playing this game in Washington, trying to track down this individual. I predict, yeah, it's not going to take long. I know you're on it. Thank you, Ed. All right, now for our special coverage, Fox News at Night, the Kavanaugh hearings. Today, the Supreme Court nominee finally got to talk substance amidst numerous outbursts and intense scrutiny about what kind of justice he would really be.
I've watched his performance. I've watched his statements. And honestly, they've been totally brilliant.
President Trump praising his second Supreme Court nominee, Brett Kavanaugh, as the judge continues to run a gauntlet marked by protesters. And senators still jousting over document production.
I would ask the chairman if he might look at some of these that are marked committee confidential.
Let me answer that for you. If you're interested in it, you could have been asking ever since August the 25th, I believe.
Today's question centering on guns.
So I've been very interested in your thinking on assault weapons.
Abortion.
I mean, you just can't. Yeah. Hey, what are you doing for lunch? Let's overrule Roe v. Wade. It doesn't work that way, right?
And on his evolution regarding whether a sitting president should be subjected to criminal and civil investigations while in office. As a member of Ken Starr's team, he advocated for aggressively questioning then-President Bill Clinton and helped to write the Starr report outlining the grounds for Clinton's eventual impeachment. Years later, he authored a law review article questioning the wisdom of subjecting sitting presidents to invasive investigations, while noting Congress holds the ultimate remedy, impeachment.
What changed was September 11th. That's what changed. President Bush said this will not happen again. And he was of single-minded focus. Every morning for the next 7 years for President Bush was still September 12th, 2001.
And it's Kavanaugh's time in the Bush White House post 9/11 that sparked numerous questions about whether he was involved in crafting warrantless surveillance programs or enhanced interrogation policies and the legal memos used to justify them.
I was not read into that program, not involved in crafting that program, nor crafting the legal justifications for that program.
And on the same day the president praised him, Kavanaugh was pressed about whether he could truly be independent from the man who would be responsible for his lifetime Supreme Court appointment.
We're in uncharted territory here. It is unprecedented for a Supreme Court nominee to be named by a president who is an unindicted co-conspirator. I would like your commitment that you will recuse yourself.
Senator, I think to be consistent with the principle of independence of the judiciary, I should not and may not make a commitment about how I would handle a particular case.
Kavanaugh was repeatedly pushed on his philosophy regarding interpretation of statutes and the concept of legislating from the bench. He said, it's not my role to update or modify statutes. That's up to lawmakers. But as a judge, I can write opinions that may give some guidance. All right, for more, tonight's Legal Eagles, the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Bush Justice Department, John Yoo, former DOJ counsel Jamil Jaffer, and senior fellow at the Center for American Progress, Ian Millhiser. Thank you all, gentlemen, for being with us tonight.
Good to be here.
All right, John, I want to start with you because you got name-checked in the hearing today. This is something from Senator Leahy.
Did you ever work with John Yoo on the constitutional implications of any warrantless surveillance program?
Well, I can't rule that. Right in the wake of September 11th, it was all hands on deck on all fronts.
John, did you expect to come up today in this hearing?
Well, I think Senator Leahy's just practicing for when Trump nominates me to the Supreme Court.
We'll be standing by.
If Trump wanted to drive Leahy crazy, that's one thing he could do. But I can answer the question for Judge Kavanaugh because he may not remember it as well as I did being there after 9/11. But I can say categorically that Judge Kavanaugh was not working on, was not in any meetings, and did not work on any memos related to what became known as the terrorist surveillance program. In fact, as I think he tried to mention there, he wasn't read into any of the programs. I think Senator Leahy doesn't really understand how classified programs work. If you're not read into something as sensitive, and that was the most sensitive program in the government at the time, you're not told about it, you can't work on it. You might have thoughts about something and you might speculate on things, but and I worked on that program, he was not part of the team that worked on it. He was not allowed to know about it.
Yeah, and
so he should just answered no.
Yeah, and your name came up as well with crafting legal policy or justification for enhanced interrogation. He said also that was something he wasn't read into and didn't have any power to control or craft any of the legal policy for that as well. We also, too, today heard from Senator Graham asking the judge about how he decides cases and whether he's ever had to do something he wasn't personally happy about. Here's what he asked.
Have you ever made a legal decision that personally was upsetting to you?
Well, I'm sure I have.
And Ian, he went on to talk about Justice Kennedy having to write this opinion that upheld the legality or constitutionality of flag burning, saying, as a judge, if you're really going to call balls and strikes, sometimes you're going to get to an end result that may not line up with you personally. That should be the whole point.
Yeah, I mean, every judge is going to have some case where the law is just so clear they have to decide things a certain way. The question is, what do you do when there's play in the law? And, you know, what we see in Judge Kavanaugh's record on abortion, on issues like net neutrality, on the First Amendment, on campaign finance, on issue after issue after issue, when there is play in the law, he takes the conservative path. But, you know, in some cases there just isn't play. In some case, no matter what judge you have on the case, they're going to decide it one way.
Well, it's interesting because with respect to things like even Obamacare, I mean, he's made decisions that have made conservatives wary about where he may be. So he's upset folks on both sides of the aisle in any occasion, as many judges who are on the bench long enough are going to do. Jamil, I want to talk to you about Senator Blumenthal. Kind of a two-part question, so I'll ask you quickly on this first one. He continues to refer to the president as an unindicted co-conspirator. Is that legally, technically correct?
We have not seen anything in any documents from the Justice Department that indicates the president was an unindicted co-conspirator. Oftentimes you would see that in a pleading, and we have not seen that. So that's a theory that he has, but not a fact that we know at this point.
Well, to that point, he then asked the nominee, Senator Blumenthal did, about whether or not he can be independent from the president. Here's what he asked him. Okay, we don't have it, so I'll tell you about it. He said basically to him, listen, this president, he called him the unindicted co-conspirator. He said, will you right now make a commitment to me that you are not going to take part in any civil or criminal case that would come before you as a justice if you make it to the bench? He said repeatedly, I want you to commit to recusing yourself. And what Kavanaugh said was, I can't commit to you on any case that may come before me for or against in any other way. He said, that's what nominees do. I've studied them, and I'm going to stick by that precedent. Jamil?
Yeah, I mean, look, Judge Kavanaugh has come up with a new term called nominee precedent. It's a common thing that a lot of nominees have done before, going all the way back to Thurgood Marshall, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg laid it out very clearly. No predictions, no forecasts, no hints. Justice Kagan said the same thing, no thumbs up, no thumbs down. This is very common. you don't ask, nor should you ask a sitting judge or a nominee up for the bench to make any commitments, and they should not answer that if asked to do that. It's not appropriate, and the senator knows that.
Okay, he spent 12 years on the bench, the federal bench, as an appellate judge. And Ian, he said today, he wakes up every day not ever thinking, how can I rewrite the law today? He says what he thinks about is how can I apply it as it's written. Do you buy that?
I mean, again, there's some cases where there's play in the law. There's some cases where there isn't play in the law. The Constitution says that you can't have unreasonable searches and seizures. It doesn't define what makes something reasonable. It says that there are these things that are called the privileges or immunities of citizenship. Doesn't tell you what they are. Doesn't tell you what cruel and unusual punishment is. So, you know, there's so many ambiguous phrases in the law that when a judge tells me, oh, I'm just going to do what's written, I'm inclined not to trust them, because often the words only get you but so far.
Well, and it's interesting because, you know, he teaches in various classes. He's taught at Harvard Law. Justice Kagan was dean then when she brought him on to teach at Harvard. And he's talked about that he tells his students there's not as much ambiguity as folks want to think there is. Don't look for ambiguity when there is clarity. John, a lot of folks today taking issue with some of those things he said, but a lot of folks, it seems like, positioning themselves for 2020 as well. Did you get that impression?
I think that's definitely what's going on because, look, Brett Kavanaugh, he has two senators to thank, Harry Reid and Chuck Schumer, because they got rid of the filibuster for judicial appointment votes. And so no matter what the Democrats are going to do in the hearings or questions asked, the Republicans have the votes on the floor. And so I think what you're seeing here, Democrats are not really trying to take down Kavanaugh. I don't think they have the votes for it. They're trying to use the hearings for some other purpose, whether appealing for their base or, as you're suggesting, some people are using it to establish a platform to run for president.
And just to remind folks, they took down, the Democrats took down that filibuster down to 51 for lower court nominees. It was Republicans who ultimately decided they would do it for the Supreme Court as well. And that got us Justice Gorsuch and possibly a Justice Kavanaugh. We'll watch again tomorrow. John, Ian, and Jamil, thank you very much. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, 13 progressive groups stepping up their criticism today of Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. The Liberal Coalition says his efforts to stop Supreme Court nominee Judge Brett Kavanaugh are failing. That may be why Schumer today failed to agree to a request from Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to allow the Senate Judiciary Committee to continue meeting beyond this 2-hour limit while the Senate's in session. Well, Schumer said no. But that didn't shut down the committee. Instead, Republicans adjourned the entire Senate, which procedurally then allowed the committee to continue its hearing until you saw it just a short time ago. Well, I asked Democratic Senator from Maryland, Ben Cardin, if progressive complaints about Democrats' ineffective efforts to stop Kavanaugh are fair.
I agree that the process has been unfair. To have an outside group make the list available to the president is wrong. The way the president went about doing the nomination I thought was wrong. And certainly the failure to produce documents is wrong. Having said that, I think the most important thing is to get the information out to the American people, to deal with the facts and circumstances, how this nomination will affect your rights. Will this person stand up for the independence of the Supreme Court to protect your rights against the abuses of government, against the abuses of whether it's the president or Congress or corporate America? Will they stand up for your constitutional rights? And there's a lot of material here that we would like to talk about. So I think it's important we get that information out to the American people.
How do you respond to Chairman Grassley, who says there's been 5 times the amount of document production for this nominee that there have been for the numerous nominees before him combined?
And it's not a matter of counting the documents. It's a matter of whether there is the full release of all information that is relevant to evaluate this nominee. And quite frankly, the time that Judge Kavanaugh spent is in the White House, they're important records for us to have. It tells a lot about his views on a lot of different issues that are important today. That information has not been made available.
We know that thousands of documents, tens of thousands, have been released, maybe hundreds of thousands with relation to the White House. I know it's not everything, which both sides admit may be nearly impossible to get at this point. He's been pressed on a number of issues: executive power, abortion, guns. Have you heard enough in his answers and what you've seen so far? We'll have another day of questioning tomorrow to answer some of the concerns you have. Would you argue that he's not qualified?
No, I would tell you that he certainly has the law school background, the professional experience that you would want to see in a nominee. My concern is that he looks like he has an agenda, that he comes off of a list prepared by outside groups, that he, in many of his rulings, ruled on the side of powerful interests, whether it's governmental interests or private sector interests. I'm concerned about the right of privacy and whether he will enforce those rights to protect individuals. I'm concerned about the status of the health care laws against pre-existing conditions, about consumer issues, whether he sides with the powerful or whether he will side with consumers. It's those issues that cause me concern, and we are talking about a person who will affect decisions on the Supreme Court for the next decade.
Do you feel comforted by the fact that he says he will adhere to precedent on things like Roe and others? He says it's not his position to legislate from the bench, but to simply call balls and strikes. He's laid out his record here. Does it give you any comfort?
Well, we know that the Supreme Court, by some 5-4 decisions, have reversed precedent in the past. And in some cases, they've done it by unanimous decision, Brown v. Board of Education, which advanced constitutional rights. My concern is whether will he use the right of advancing constitutional protections, and in some cases not be committed by the past to make sure that we advance the rights of individuals against the powerful. So those types of decisions, I'm not comforted when someone says that they'll follow stare decisis or follow the precedents of the court. We expect a nominee to say that. The question is, where does he stand when it comes to your rights, to protect your rights for your health care, to make your own health care decisions, to protect your rights as a consumer to be able to buy health insurance that protects the interests that you have, how he will protect your rights against corporate America to make sure you have clean air and clean water. That's what I'm concerned about.
What do you make of the allegations or suggestions that there's been a coordinated effort with Senate Democrats and these protesters that we keep seeing pop up?
Well, you know, I can assure you that I know nothing at all about that. Individuals are here. I would prefer that the proceedings be done in an orderly manner so that we can get the message out at this hearing about these issues that I've talked about.
All right. Will Judge Kavanaugh look the other way in a case against the president who nominated him? We're going to talk about it with Senator Orrin Hatch. And joining us live, President Trump's personal attorney, Jay Sekulow. He'll give us his thoughts on the Kavanaugh hearings. He's argued many a Supreme Court case, and also allegations in the Woodward book that Sekulow is flat out denying. Welcome back to Fox News at Night, the Kavanaugh hearings. Both sides asking tough questions for the Supreme Court nominee about executive power amid the Russia probe. I asked Senator Orrin Hatch, who questioned Kavanaugh today, if he was satisfied the potential justice can be independent from the man who nominated him, and about Democrats demanding more documents today.
Well, talk about withholding documents. They haven't been willing to give anything. I mean, they've been just, they're hardly in a position to criticize anybody. But he's given thousands and thousands of pages of documents. And, you know, you reach a point where they don't even read them. They don't look at them. So who's making these stupid arguments? No, but there are plenty of documents. There's plenty to judge this candidate by. And frankly, he's doing a great job.
How did you like his answers to you about whether he will be independent? Because, you know, there have been others on the committee who have suggested that the president handpicked him because he doesn't believe that a sitting president maybe should be subjected to criminal or civil investigations. And they say, you know, basically Kavanaugh will be the president's get out of jail card. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, I think that's presuming too much. I think too many people are trying to, they hate President Trump. There's just no question about it. And they'll do anything to smear him or sack him. And to be honest with you, we're light years away from that type of thing, even if it's possible. But I think this man is going to do what's right. He's not going to be a lackey for President Trump or us or anybody else. That's what's great about him. He's intelligent. He's articulate. He's smart. He knows what he's doing. And he's been an excellent judge on the Circuit Court of Appeals, the second highest court in the country.
And you're convinced of his independence?
Yeah, he's independent. There's no question about that. I know him very, very well. And he's like the guy next door. Here's a guy that plays basketball, with kids and does a lot of things that you'd like your neighbors to do for your kids. And he's just a very, very fine person. He's religious. He believes in his religion. He fosters it and lives it. He's a good family man. His parents are great people. I mean, how do you ask for somebody better than this?
Well, we've talked to many of your counterparts on the other side of the aisle who think he has an agenda. And there are a lot of people here who have been protesting this week who say the same thing. Have you ever seen something like you've seen with the protesters this week in this committee?
Oh, yeah. We've had pretty sour protesters in a number of other Supreme Court nominations, but it's been pretty bad here. I'm disgusted with some of these people that just don't seem to understand the gravity of these hearings and who want to disrupt them and hurt them. And they're not people who want to listen. They're people who just want to disrupt.
Well, Judge Kavanaugh was the one in the hot seat today, but it was the president often taking center stage during the hearings for his second Supreme Court nominee. Personal attorney for the president and Supreme Court advocate himself, Jay Sekulow, is here to weigh in on what we saw today. Good evening, Jay.
Hi, Shannon. How are you?
I'm good. I want to play a little something, first of all, with the ranking member, Senator Dianne Feinstein, the top Democrat. Here's her interchange with the nominee.
Can a sitting president be required to respond to a subpoena?
Going with the Justice Ginsburg principle, which is really not the Justice Ginsburg alone principle. It's everyone's principle on the current Supreme Court. And as a matter of the canons of judicial independence, I can't give you an answer on that hypothetical question.
And Jay, he was asked a lot of other questions, including by Senator Blumenthal, who said, I want you to promise to recuse on any case that would come before you involving the president. Is it posturing, or are these legitimate legal questions and concerns by the Democrats?
Well, they're not legitimate at all. Let me say, I've argued in front of the Supreme Court for over 3 decades. And the idea that a nominee of a sitting president would have to recuse himself involving cases that might involve the president or policies of the president would mean justices would be recusing themselves on every case. So that's absurd. What is Brett Kavanaugh going to do? If a case comes before him, he's going to review the briefs, listen to the oral arguments, and make a decision to defend the Constitution of the United States as he views the Constitution. That is what we expect of Article III judges. That is what we expect of Supreme Court justices. And, I noticed on some of the other networks, they were talking about this, Brett Kavanaugh having a grilling is what one of the networks said today before the Judiciary Committee. Now, I know, Shannon, you've been covering this for a long time, and you've been covering it today and very thoroughly. But there was no grilling of Brett Kavanaugh. In fact, Dianne Feinstein had to come in at one point to correct Senator Leahy, who was pointing out, trying to cross-examine, so to speak, Brett Kavanaugh with a document saying there was a reference to him in this particular document. And when everybody looked at it, and Senator Leahy finally was told that it doesn't reference the nominee to the Supreme Court, and it was Senator Feinstein that says he's not in it. It's not there. Oh, okay, let's go to the next document. So the lack of preparation, this is a lot of show. The fact is, under the Constitution, Brett Kavanaugh has a job to do when he is confirmed, and he will be confirmed as a justice of the Supreme Court, and I suspect before the first Monday in October that he will be a justice on that court. And the fact is, he reviews the law, reviews the facts, listens to the arguments, and makes a decision like every other justice in the Supreme Court.
And I talked to Senator Lee, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who questioned Kavanaugh today as well, probed him on a number of issues. I also talked to him about this story today about this senior Trump official who has this anonymous piece in the New York Times, and whether it's fair for someone close to the president or in his orbit to make these kinds of claims. Here's what Senator Lee told me.
I think it's kind of odd for somebody to stay in under the false pretense that they're there to help, that they're there to be a part of the administration if they're actively undermining it. Now, if they see things that are wrong, that are illegal, that are immoral, they ought to leave.
Are you worried that there are people around the president who don't have his best interests at heart?
Look, I'm not going to comment on Anonymous. I mean, let's start with that first, okay? Anonymous is doing an op-ed. You know, it's one thing you got anonymous sources, an article. This is an anonymous op-ed. So, you know, to me, looking at this as the president's lawyer, this is, I mean, look what's going on right now. We've got a nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States. You've got international issues that are very significant involving China and Russia and North Korea, and we're talking about Anonymous. Now, let's just focus on that for a moment. We're talking about an anonymous op-ed in the New York Times. So, I mean, let's think about this for a moment, Shannon. You and I have been talking about a Supreme Court nominee that will serve for life, that will have an impact on the Constitution of the United States for decades, which is what they're supposed to do. And instead, we're now talking about Anonymous. So let me tell you what my answer to Anonymous is. I'm not talking about Anonymous.
Okay. With that in mind, listen, when I was a practicing attorney, I much preferred interrogatories, written questions for my client. I know these are things you're negotiating. You can't talk about the substance of what you're talking about with the special counsel, but can you give us a timeline that you think this might be resolved one way or another?
Well, let me tell you what I don't give. And you know that from me, you've known me a long time. I don't give timelines. Look, I think it needs to be wrapped up soon for the good of the country, for our national security interests. Just to get this investigation done. This has been the most transparent inquiry of a White House in history. 1.4 million documents, over 30 witnesses that were put forward by the administration. This was as transparent. I mean, I don't think Bob Mueller would argue that this is not transparent. So it's very transparent. Now, when you get down to the question of where we are now, I'm not going to, as you said, I'm not going to, our policy is we are not going to comment on ongoing dialogue that we have with the Office of Special Counsel. I'm not going to breach that here. I wouldn't do that. I will tell you this, though. Obviously, there's a process that you go through. We've looked at this historically. There's a lot of administrations have had these kind of inquiries before, and you handle it in an appropriate way. Our job, my job, Mayor Giuliani's job, the Raskins, our legal team's job, is to defend the president. That's our job, of what any lawyer would do in a situation like this, and we're going to do recommend what's in the best interest of the president, what we think is the appropriate review here, and I'm hopeful that it will be resolved sooner rather than later. That's about as good as I'm going to say. That's about the date I'll give you, sooner rather than later.
Okay, we'll take it. Jay, keep us updated.
All right, we will.
Great to see you. All right, Google stays home as social media takes a lashing on Capitol Hill. Questions about stifling free speech, suggestions of violating antitrust laws. And we're going to explain what this interruption in the hearing was all about. That is why they're censoring and shadow banning.
How about it in? 12 and a half, 15, 7 and a half, $20, 2 and a half, 5, 7 and a half, 30. Hit $30 down here, 2 and a half, 5, 35, 7 and a half, 40. Hit $40, 2 and a half, 5, 5, 45, 7 and a half.
Shares of social media companies tumbling today amid another hearing on Capitol Hill that some say had the circus-like flavor of the Kavanaugh hearings. Kristen Fisher joins us now, and I'm glad you were tracking that one while I was on the other one.
There was so much happening on Capitol Hill today. It was crazy. And, you know, the whole purpose of one of today's hearings was for House Republicans to get answers from Twitter's CEO about what they claim is the platform's anti-conservative bias. It had all the makings of what could have been a fiery back and forth. But in the end, it was two far-right firebrands who had everyone on Capitol Hill asking, did that really just happen?
Quarter now, half, 3 and a half, 75, 400.
That's Republican Congressman and former auctioneer Billy Long drowning out a protester who was accusing Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey of censoring and shadow banning conservatives. Well, on the other side of Capitol Hill,
that's why you get elected.
Be regulated like do they need to be regulated?
Marco Rubio, the snake. Little frat boy here.
All right, man.
Yeah.
Who are you?
Yeah, sure.
That's InfoWars host Alex Jones accosting Senator Marco Rubio in a Senate hallway.
Here's a question.
Don't touch me again, man. I'm asking you not to touch me.
Well, sure, I just patted you nicely.
I know, but I don't want to be. I don't know.
You want me to get arrested?
I don't know who you are.
It's not just going to take
get arrested. Man, you're not going to get arrested. I'll take care of myself.
Oh, he'll beat me up.
I didn't say that.
Inside, Rubio also took aim at Google's CEO, who was a no-show at today's Senate hearing on foreign interference in the 2016 election.
They're not here today, and maybe it's because they're arrogant.
But Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg showed up.
We were too slow to spot this and too slow to act.
So did Twitter's Dorsey.
Are you censoring people?
No.
Twitter shadow banning prominent Republicans. It's bad. Is that true?
No.
What did the algorithm take into account
that led to prominent conservatives, including members of the U.S. House of Representatives, not being included in auto search suggestions.
We were using a signal of the behavior of the people following accounts. And we didn't believe, upon further consideration and also seeing the impact, which was about 600,000 accounts.
And Dorsey says that some Democratic lawmakers had the same problem, but the Justice Department isn't so sure. The Attorney General has just scheduled a meeting with state attorneys general in September to discuss what he describes as a growing concern that these tech companies may be intentionally stifling the free exchange of ideas on their platform. So it's not over yet, Shannon.
There's a lot in that story that I'm still not over. The bidding, the auctioneer,
could have gone
Marco
on
Rubio, Alex Jones.
That could have been my whole story tonight.
I know. Awkward. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Good to see you, Kristen. All right, for more on this, tonight's panel, Fox News contributor Leslie Marshall and radio host on WMAL in Washington, D.C., Larry O'Connor. All right. Guys, yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I want to start with this, though. Senator Warner, first of all, who called out Google. He was very unhappy they didn't send their top person to this hearing today. But this is also what he said about the challenges these companies face.
The Russians also continue to infiltrate and manipulate American social media to hijack our national conversation. Again, you've gotten better, and I'm pleased to see that you've begun to take action, but also the Russians are getting better as well.
So, Leslie, giving them some credit there for stepping forward, but really plenty of critique about how they could be doing better. And it's tough to keep up with a group like the Russians who are very determined.
Yeah, those are the things that bother me most. It's not the left or right. I mean, we have to, realize that there is no regulation of these search engines, of social media on the internet. And quite frankly, they are not under the umbrella of the First Amendment currently, not being regulated. So they can do what they want as private owners, quite frankly, in cyberspace. But what concerns me is not just Russia and the meddling. It's when there are completely fake movements left and right out there. The whole pizza pedophilia thing, for example, that can lead to danger. I mean, somebody walking in with a gun wanting to, harm someone, to be violent or even to take a life. That concerns me, and obviously meddling in our elections, whether it's left or right, I want it to be a fair, level playing field and a fair game, and so I'm glad that Warner brought that out.
Okay, I want to read an op-ed from Steve Schillingford, a cybersecurity and privacy expert, founder and CEO of Anonym, if I'm saying that right, Labs. Tech giants like Facebook, Twitter, and Google have grown so powerful that they can, whether through intent or incompetence, unleash serious threats to our society and political system. Yet they remain secretive and unaccountable. The time has come for a serious consideration of antitrust action against these companies. They're just too big now and therefore too dangerous. But Larry, these are private companies.
Well, they are, except we also, listen, I believe in the free market, not necessarily big business. And big businesses love to squelch the free market because they want to dominate. And these businesses are dominating right now. And let's just be clear here. This is a serious issue. We had a federal judge tell the President of the United States he couldn't block people on Twitter because of First Amendment grounds. So that sort of establishes the idea that the world of social media and intercourse on social media is somehow connected to the First Amendment, right? And then you've got this company, Twitter, blocking in a very capricious way without any real terms or conditions that are explained, without any real criteria about who gets blocked and who doesn't. They're just sort of doing it willy-nilly. And it sure seems like it's faulting on one side of the political equation. And I'll prove it. They even said that normally they would block Donald Trump because he breaks their rules, but they're going to let him continue to be on Twitter. Prager got blocked on YouTube, an intellectual guy. Yeah, I mean, he's an intellectual.
We are out of time, but I got to say, listen, if Twitter at some point decides to block the president, I think we're going to hear it from here, the White House. It's a few blocks away, but
yeah,
wow,
you're right about
what that would unleash. Okay, Leslie and Larry, come back soon.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you. All right, coming up, the hearings get tense as Kavanaugh is repeatedly grilled about his views on Roe v. Wade, guns, and more. Chad Pergram takes us inside the numbers at the hearing today and a look at what to expect tomorrow. This is a Fox News alert. South and North Korean diplomats emerging to report that Kim Jong-un is still committed to complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. Senior South Korean official says Kim is insisting that a rocket site allegedly dismantled by the Hermit Kingdom is proof the complete suspension of all future long-range missile tests. While the Trump administration says Pyongyang must take more disarmament measures. Democrats particularly drilling down on Judge Kavanaugh's decision in a case involving an illegal immigrant teenager who wanted an abortion after crossing into the U.S. Trace is on the case for us tonight. It got a lot of attention today, Trace.
It did indeed, Shannon. Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh has said Roe v. Wade is settled law and has repeatedly emphasized the importance of precedent, noting that since 1973, the High Court has reaffirmed Roe many times. But Kavanaugh won't say whether he believes Roe was correctly decided. And that, as you noted, has Democrats probing for more insight into his views on abortion. Today, Illinois Democratic Senator Dick Durbin pressed Kavanaugh on his only abortion ruling during his 12 years on the D.C. Appellate Court. The case last fall involved a pregnant 17-year-old illegal immigrant who was in federal custody. The Trump administration argued it would break the law if the government facilitated the abortion, and Judge Kavanaugh ruled the procedure should be delayed, citing the girl's age and noting the Supreme Court has upheld parental consent laws that can delay abortions. Watch.
She's from another country. She does not speak English. She's by herself. If she had been an adult, she would have a right to obtain the abortion immediately.
Senator Durbin pushed back, saying the teen had already been given permission by a Texas judge to obtain the abortion. Watch again.
The clock is ticking. 20-week clock is ticking.
Again, I'm a judge. I'm not making the policy decision. My job is to decide whether that policy is consistent with law.
Judge Kavanaugh's ruling that delayed the teen's abortion was overturned by the full appeals court. But Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal thinks Judge Kavanaugh's ruling was really a signal to the Trump administration that he's willing to overturn Roe v. Wade. Meantime, the Department of Health and Human Services is also in a legal battle over whether pregnant illegal immigrant teens in federal custodies have a constitutional right to abortion. Shannon.
It's funny because there are just as many conservatives who tell me they're worried about him because of the Garza decision, too. Both sides may be not sure where he'd go next. All right, Trace, thank you.
Sure.
How many arrests and a scoreboard? Who's for and who's against Kavanaugh as of tonight? That's next.